Yeah, when I think of like 90s terms that I haven't thought of in a very long time, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles usually comes up right away because I feel like it was out of place even when it was popular, like when it first came up. So yeah, it's really interesting to do a rewatch now because you're watching a time capsule in every conceivable way.
And because you're not kidding on that. Like, this is definitely an idea that had to be pitched. I used to think for the movie, I remember this. Like, they had to pitch this to so many different studios, and actually even to get toys, you had someone going around pitching the idea over and over and over again, and no one would bite on it. So, like, when you said like it was out of place for its time, it was very out of place for its time, and yet oddly helped define the time that it was like made in.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you know what? We're not going to put a whole lot of mystery behind this one, folks. We're going to be talking about the 1987 animation Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And for those of you watching the video program and not the audio, you might notice we brought a friend back to help us out. Mr. Doug Eberle joins us again. Doug, how are you, sir?
Doing very well, Mark. How are you?
Honestly, your hair looks great. The hairline is immaculate. I just feel so happy for you, sir. But yeah, dude, you know what? When we start talking about certain things on this program, usually if there's something with any kind of comic tie-in or some kind of like retro animation tie-in, like I feel like we're on the same page usually with this kind of stuff, and so it's really fun to have you back because
thank you.
We've been diving back into animation this year, man. So I guess as an icebreaker, Doug, did you start off watching the original TMNT cartoon like when it aired, or were you like me and like caught it in syndication and then worked its way back?
When it aired. So I was born in 1983. I don't think I caught the first episode, but I definitely got my first toy when I was 5 years old at KB Toys in the mall. It was Leonardo, just the original Leonardo toy. My grandma bought it for me. And that was actually my first introduction. And then immediately I was watching the show. So it was 1988 when I started watching it. So I didn't catch the first episode, I did. I would watch the new ones a lot. It was the kind of thing where I would come home from school. I remember it was on at 2 and 2:30 in the afternoon. And a lot of times I'd miss like the first one or maybe even like 10 minutes into the second episode, but I'd catch it whenever I could. And there's a chance that I've seen every episode between the first episode and maybe 1992. I do remember a point where I kind of started falling out of it. I was getting a little older, and there's a lot of characters I don't know too much about after that. But you know, my mileage on all of the premiere episodes and all of the most iconic ones is pretty up there.
Awesome. Joe, how about yourself? How did you start watching the property? How did it get introduced to you?
Mine was like Doug. Like I was hooked on it right away as a kid. So I was fortunate where grew up watching this, and it was broadcast on, you know, one of like the big four major TV networks of the time. I don't remember if it was like Fox, CBS, ABC.
I was trying to remember that.
Or NBC. Yeah, I can't remember. I'm leaning CBS just because I know like now I think one of the only legal ways to stream it is through Paramount Plus. And I know they
really
like that's like CBS is a part of that whole area.
I was leaning towards ABC. I was also considering, which at the time might have been WPIX.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was considering that. It would be interesting if we can find out what it actually was before the end of this episode.
It's like we'll get the producers on it, no doubt. But yeah. I mean, kind of the same thing. Like this is a long running show. Like I forget how long this show actually went on for, because like it started off as like a little like mini series. Season 1 was literally 5 episodes, and then like it went crazy and had 10 seasons after that. And like I'm the same, like on the same page as Doug, where like there are a lot of characters I do not recognize. Like I remember, like, what was it, Shellhead, Leatherface? Not Leatherface. No, Leatherhead, not Leatherface.
Leatherhead.
Two very different things. One is an alligator from the bayou. The other is a nightmare.
It was a very high body count in those early seasons, just blood and gore everywhere on a children's show.
Yes, much more faithful to the comics than we imagined. But on that note of obscure characters, one of the more obscure characters is actually the most valuable figure from this line. If you were to go back and look into your stash of like 1993 action figures, which figure from this line do you think actually holds the most value as a little bizarre piece of trivia to kick the show off? This is open to both of you, by the way. Which what character?
I need a hint. Like, when did it come out? Is it because I had a lot of the toys, a real lot.
Yeah. So it was released in 93, was the official date. So it's part of that like original like Playmates run. I will also say it is something, I don't know, to narrow it down, it is like a mutated animal of some sort. So that way, to rule out like Shredder and Krang, and like some of the others. But yep, it's one of the mutated animal characters. Of the mutated animal characters, which one do you think currently holds the crown as the most valuable Ninja Turtles figure?
I'm definitely wrong, but I'm going to throw out Scumbug.
See, my brain went towards either like Scumbug, like not any of the ones that you saw at everybody's house. Because I feel like if it's an older toy, if everybody had it, that's not the one that's going to be the most amount of money. So for me, it was either Scumbug. I was going to forget his name as soon as I needed it. It was the duck captain with the wings attached.
Yeah.
Damn it, I was going to forget his name, but that was the only other one I could think of right offhand. So I'm probably wrong, but Joe, take it away.
It is neither of those. Do you recall a character by the name of Scratch the Cat?
Oh my god,
not at all.
No.
Wait.
No one remembers Scratch the Cat, and it's because it's when the show is in like its major decline, and people start like falling off the wagon for Ninja Turtles, but they're still pumping out toys. And if you go on eBay now, you can find an original 1993 mint in box Scratch the Cat for the low price of $6,374.96.
See.
As
that's the one
that now.
None of my friends had that. I mean, was that from like the Red Sky part of the history of the franchise, or was this before that?
Like as far as like Red Sky, like on the background of the figure?
No. I mean like the shift in tone from like the first 7 seasons to the last 3, 4. You know, like it was I didn't know if that was the era or not. But Joe, that's how this stuff usually ends up being. Is like seriously, that is the toy that none of us saw growing up, and surprise to no one, that's the one that's worth a shitload of money.
Yeah, I mean it's the thing where like new shows come on and interests completely shift, because if you remember your youth very much, 1993 is the year the Power Rangers come on the scene, and I was one of the people who just jumped on that bandwagon right away and got swept up by fighting multicolored dinosaurs. And it completely just pushed off the Ninja Turtles cartoon for me at that point.
This is one of those properties where I feel like not a lot of people dig into like the behind the scenes stuff of it. I know I didn't really. The only thing I knew about it was that Fred Wolf Films is the one who made it, literally an Ireland-based animation company. We talked about Chuck Lorre when we talked about The Big Bang Theory. He wasn't involved in making the show, but he was involved in helping craft the theme song when they redid it a little bit later on. So that CBS guys, man, they just can't get away from them. But ultimately, though, Joe, to fill in some of the gaps for you, this show actually went from 1987, that 5-part miniseries that you called out, and it actually lasted until November 2nd, 1996.
Wow.
So, just like, dude, like the real Ghostbusters, this thing was like the platform for pushing toys, pushing, TMNT dildos, like everything. Just a massive powerhouse of advertising here.
It's one of those things where like, okay, people are jumping off the Ninja Turtles. What do we do? It's like, don't worry. the franchise will adapt. And you're like, how is it going to adapt? More weird toys. That's how it adapts.
Yep. These kids these days, they want those sex swings, okay? We know a thing or two. So, yeah. I told you I was going to bring some adult commentary, Doug, and damn it, I'm doing it. But a couple legends of voice acting are involved in this series. So for 10 seasons and 193 episodes, we have Cam Clark as the voice of Leonardo, Barry Gordon as the voice of Donatello, everyone's favorite actor, Rob Paulsen, who is like a legend of 90s animation, playing Raphael, who I got to say, and I want to get your guys' opinion on this, was Rob Paulsen as Raphael, did that feel a little actually out of place? Like, what were your thoughts on his portrayal?
Not to me. That was probably my favorite voice. And maybe because I would notice it in so many other cartoons. But Raphael was at least my favorite character just because of his attitude and everything. And just felt like the most iconic in a way.
Joe, what about you?
I mean, well, what can I say? He was cool but rude. And I think Rob Paulsen pulled it off pretty well, at least for like a kid's show. Because like obviously like if you were to look at like the original movie from 1990 and like this guy's, you know, just throwing out dams because he lost his sigh. He's like doesn't give a shit about anyone. He's chucking a sigh at Donnie's crotch when Donnie's cracking jokes at him. Like you can't go like that in a kid's show. So what do? Heavily laced sarcasm. And that's as dicky as he could be. So I think Rob worked for this one.
See, now, the only reason why I call this out is because in the years following, if you go online and you start looking at forums, what people are saying, because of how Raphael is portrayed in later series, some people have like said that Rob Paulsen made it like maybe didn't sound as tough as Raphael did in other properties. Like his voice is a little too high for Raphael, and even in some of the series after this, Raphael ends up becoming this like behemoth turtle compared to the other three, and so he ends up having like a deeper voice. Personally, I didn't hate Rob Paulsen. I thought Rob Paulsen was fantastic, as you guys have mentioned, but that's what some people said, and I'm still kind of shocked by that.
I think that's a little unfair because, you know, they're being like Monday morning quarterbacks. They're looking at it from an adult perspective. And that's not what we were watching. You know, I'm sure there were adults watching it in 1987, you know, when it came out, but they were a big minority. So no children watching this show in the late 80s were thinking this about his voice, thinking it was out of place, or comparing it to anything that would take place in the future. It's the only thing that existed.
I am not disagreeing with you on that. And to round out the top four, we got Townsend Coleman as the voice of Michelangelo. So if we're talking about the voice actors, though, obviously there's Pat Fraley, who voiced Krang, Casey Jones, and Baxter Stockman. We also have James Avery, the voice of Shredder, also known as Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Rest in peace, sir.
Yes.
I have to say, what do you guys think of James Avery's voice as Shredder?
Amazing.
I mean, yeah, he has this great way of I don't know, like making him sound sinister and not too scary for a kid's cartoon in the 90s. Like obviously, like looking at, I don't know, isn't it weird how like we can say that our generation is tougher than like the current generation of kids, and we reference our parents and our upbringing, but then we watch our cartoons like this Shredder, and if we compare him to a modern cartoon Shredder, this is definitely Shredder Light, which is nothing against Uncle Phil. There's the one out of place episode where like Shredder and Mikey had a bonding moment over how Michelangelo's father had come back into his life only to abandon him again. And Shredder just hugged Michelangelo as he cried. Out of place, but still powerful.
I can't imagine how that would have sounded, because there's no way to make it serious where he's like,
no,
why didn't he want me, man? It's not tubular, dude. But ultimately, James Avery, I think, Joe, to your point, he really did manage to be just the right amount of sinister. We're not talking about truly evil here. I feel like not just with Shredder, all the villains on this show, it always seemed like none of them really ever got the plot because they were always fighting against each other. They were always willing to undercut someone else. Like early on, Krang is like, hey, I'll turn shit on Shredder and fuck up his day because I would rather be winning. I mean, I haven't really seen a cartoon that had the bad guys consistently like screwing with each other.
Well, I mean, they also like puffed like themselves up a lot. Like one thing that like I remember about the show, or even like I guess I don't remember about the show, is like I remember like Krang secretly actually being the main villain, even though we all just like Shredder better. But Krang is definitely the guy, like again, like the person who we have threatened us by saying they know karate, but they never do karate. Because Krang is this warlord from Dimension X who he has said has never lost a fight, but somehow is in our dimension without a body where he's been like exiled. So it's like, well, if you never lost, how'd you get here, buddy? Like champ, slugger, number one, how'd you do it? I believe in you. You're the best, but I would like to know, why are you just a brain with tentacles? How'd you get here?
Like seriously, like why are you a scrotum that requires something else to carry you around? I don't quite understand this, Krang. Could you please explain this to me? So Doug, interested to get your thoughts on this. In the cartoon, they ended up changing the origins quite a bit, where Splinter was actually formerly a human as opposed to just being a rat who, happened to wade into some toxic waste. And so we've got this different origin that even the movies didn't try to do. I mean, what are your thoughts on how they chose to start this one off?
So I actually like it a lot. Because this existed in many different eras of comics, many different cartoons, movies, etc. You get many different origin stories. So I don't really think that there's one that I hold as being the true one. For instance, in the most recent comic series, the origin is that they were all humans at one point, and Shredder actually murders them all, and they're reincarnated as turtles and rats. And then they are involved in the programs with the mutagen and everything, and turned into mutants, and they slowly start gaining their memories. Like Splinter realizes, oh man, these are my children, and they all start kind of thinking about what happened. Splinter being a human and having that dynamic with Shredder and that history, I actually think is really cool. In the movie, they have a similar dynamic in that they had a relationship at some point, but it's really odd that they chose to just keep him as a rat that had this vendetta.
Doug, I love that call out though about how there are a lot of different turtle origins here, right? We've got the comic version, we've got the animated version, now we've got the movie different versions. You just mentioned the IDW, the later comics too. What I'm really happy about is that we don't have any biblical arguments over whether the Old Testament or the New Testament is the right way to go here. But let's talk about Dimension X for a second, because as we start to look at the larger property as a whole, Dimension X is one of those things that in the cinematic universe, we get a little bit of exposure to, but it's never really at the forefront, especially like the Michael Bay universe, for example. So what are the thoughts on Dimension X? I want to start with you, Joe, because I feel like you've got some strong opinions here.
Well, I mean, not necessarily strong opinions. Dimension X to me was always like this fun wild card in the story, because you've got like what you're usually concerned with like the mutagen stuff going on in the main universe. Shredder is always the the big bad we're really watching for, and then out of nowhere will be a bunch of teenagers in flying Cadillacs, just hooting and hollering, having a good time. Or you've got rock people that are also like generals. Eventually, I think there are dinosaurs involved from Dimension X. It is just basically a writer's dream and scapegoat at the same time, because since it's for children, you don't need canon for children. You just need something cool looking to pop on the TV. that'll make us interested. You look at the things the kids like and you make it a character. And that's all you have to do. And then sadly, those kids grow up. They don't grow up, they grow old and want the same things they had as a kid. And now expect some big, long lore into why things are the way they are. And it's just guys and how to be like, guys, we were high as shit and it sounded cool. Like, what do you want from us? That's Dimension X.
I can't really disagree with you on that front, but I mean, it's true because and going back, Doug, to talking about how we got exposed to this property, when I was actually playing like the Turtles arcade game, for example, I had only really seen maybe bits and pieces of the first season, a bit of season 2. And so I'm seeing all these bosses in the arcade game. And I'm like, who the hell is that? What the fuck is that? I don't even remember. What is that from? And then I would play Turtles in Time, and suddenly the pizza monsters are there. And so I had like, it was weird that the tie-ins for the game made me watch the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of many other things that have that kind of, branding power. One piece of lore I do want to return to for a second, though, is the ooze, because in this version, Shredder is the one who throws the ooze into the sewers into an attempt to kill Splinter, his human form, right? And what I've never really quite understood was that their logic is the last thing you touch is what you transform into once you come in contact with the ooze. So the question I want to ask you guys, if I had just stepped up to the urinal and peed for a solid 30 seconds to a minute, would I transform into a giant dick?
Yes, you would.
Well, maybe. And
you would.
And who's to say here? Because, there could be a colony of tardigrade living on my face. They're all animals, Mark. Do I turn into a giant tardigrade, or do I turn into a corgi? I don't know. Is this a power of the mind thing, or is this an actual physical contact?
There was one character, I can't remember their name, but they were just a pile of garbage.
Wait, Donald Trump was on this cartoon?
Do you know what I'm talking about? He had like a little banana peel.
Oh, yes. Was that? It's not Toxic Avenger, but it's like, but he looks like the Toxic Avenger.
Very reminiscent of the Toxic Avenger.
Yeah.
He would carry a garbage can lid, he had a garbage can lid for a foot. And he was a pile of garbage. Yeah. So that's not an animal.
He was voiced by Danny DeVito, just going there, just grabbing all the trash and just throwing it everywhere.
I do remember that now. But that's the whole point, though. Like, yes, this guy touched trash, became trash. So I feel like if you accidentally didn't shave your pubes for a while and you were vigorously peeing, you could be giant pube man.
Just a single pube?
Just one giant pube. We're not talking like a bush here. We're just talking like a tree trunk of a pube. And that's who you are now.
Embarrassing. Like, how do you, because you're going to try and make up your own, backstory to that. And be like, I was a wronged hairdresser. And someone came into my barber shop and threw ooze all over me while I was cleaning up one day. It became a giant hair. And they're like, shut up, Joe. You were masturbating again, weren't you? Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Hey, okay, Joe, when there's a fallen tree in the Midwest, we usually can drive around it. But if there's a fallen giant pube in the middle of the New York City streets, I'm guessing that's going to fuck things up for a while.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Or so there is a use.
No, probably not. Everybody would just walk around it.
What
the
hell's going on here?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that, of New York, this is also one of those properties where the characters very much identify as New Yorkers. That they part of what makes the characters great is their identity and relationship with the city. And I would like to hear your perspectives, especially Doug, as a native New Yorker, how you think this series does with portraying New York lifestyle. Because right away in the pilot, you've got a granny who's afraid of the turtles, and she's pushing a shopping cart, and she pulls out a machine gun from the shopping cart and tells them to get away. Well, it's interesting.
The 80s were definitely more of a violent time, a lot more gang activity. And, I think this is a good time to rope in the fact that the creators, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, when they made this, they were kind of doing a parody of Daredevil, which takes place entirely in Hell's Kitchen. And you've got some of the parallels between it. Like in Daredevil, they fight the hand. So what happens in Ninja Turtles? They fight the foot. And then you have Daredevil's instructor was named Stick. So Splinter, there's so much of that comes into it. So a lot of the New York City grit and grime that was portrayed in the Ninja Turtles was essentially that same world and based off of one of the more rough neighborhoods in New York City. So yeah, it carries over from that and does just as good of a job as portraying that kind of like street level threats that they would face.
Which is cool.
I mean, as I say, looking at like definitely the climate of like the first few episodes of the show along with the movie, like the big story is not necessarily that it's like, a secret clan of ninjas right away. It's like, nope, it is just sky high crime. And if that's basically what's in the news or dominating New York headlines at that time, it makes sense that you're adapting that into this cartoon show.
Which is why I really love some of the modern adaptations of this property, because they do tend to lean into like the city a little bit more and the people of the city. And in this one, they definitely have a good profile that's set up, but really they've leaned heavily into everybody versus the Turtles. Like there's this like fake news campaign. April O'Neil's bosses are out there smearing the Turtles at every turn they possibly can. The Fox
I gotta
News
worry about those ratings.
Yeah.
Smear the Turtles.
It's true though. I mean, that's like almost the crux of like the early seasons of this show is like, the Turtles are actually doing a lot of good shit, but the news is kind of dragging them through it. And so it was an interesting thing to go back and watch, because I didn't really catch that the first time, being honest with you. Like I never paid attention to it. Like the media, oh my God, it has a place in New York. I never would have guessed. And so going back to it, it's really interesting to see how really the news media, while it's transplanted almost 30 years now, hasn't really changed a whole lot, like in terms of like misinformation. So it's almost depressing in a way.
It probably wasn't that hard for them to smear the Turtles because, they're giant turtles. One of the great things I loved about the animated series that I want to throw in here now is do you recall the masks and trench coats that they would wear when they went out in public?
Oh, yes.
Where they just had kind of a rubber mask of a generic human face and a coat, and they looked so much worse than their turtle counterparts. They looked so much more frightening, but everybody's like, oh, there's just some normal people over there.
Yeah. Well, the same thing goes for like, there's an episode where they're chasing Baxter and they're wearing like these like science outfits or something, and they're like at a county fair and everyone's like, hey, look at that person dressed up as a turtle. Hey, and it's like, no, guys, actually look at that thing. And then they take off the suits and everyone's like, oh my God. And it's like, did you not notice the whole
thing? Yeah.
green head thing? Okay. All right, cool. That just must be what New York was like in the 80s.
And even then, like, the human masks were later development in the show, because earlier on you see them just in trench coats and fedoras, and they're walking around just like trying to like not draw attention to themselves. And then, I mean, there's even one episode where they go like punk and hip hop, just hanging out on the street outside of the news station waiting for April, and it's literally just leather coats. That's all. Leather coats, maybe some parachute pants as they're hanging out, like break dancing, and just kind of being a stereotype of the time. I should say, where it's like, what? It's just not a stereotype. It is all the fads mixed into four turtles with no masks, just sunglasses and still bandanas. So the human masks were an eerie eventual development that makes sense, but was executed very, very oddly.
Yes.
It just feels like a mainstay of the Turtles in this era, right? Like, because even in the movies, they put a trench coat and a hat on, and suddenly you're just completely neglecting all of that like salmonella looking skin underneath. But hey, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah.
But one thing that was interesting about the animated series, though, is that there is a major tonal shift that happens after the first 6-7 seasons. We talked about just a few moments ago where they call it the Red Sky version of the show. And so, Doug, they re-stylized the theme song with this like 90s trash that's just really hard to listen to.
Really?
I think so, because the original song for me, pretty iconic. I mean,
oh yeah, definitely.
But the second one that they went with, and
I had definitely fallen out of it before this happened. So I would say, or like he was mentioning, like 93, Power Rangers came out. I was probably a couple of years before that. I was not into Ninja Turtles. For me, it was X-Men, the animated series, that changed me. So maybe that was like a little bit before Power Rangers. But yeah, Turtles had gone on for quite a while and I was out of it. So I might not have even ever heard this thrash theme song.
It's, for those of you who haven't seen it or haven't heard it, it's not great. Like they redid the whole intro and they spliced in clips from the actual movies themselves in the intro to kind of like match what was going on in the animation. But there are some interesting differences, though, in terms of that tone that we talked about. And you guys actually alluded to this a little bit, how, Eastman and Laird were kind of borrowing from Daredevil quite a bit. There ends up being a new villain named Megavolt, who they introduce in these later Red Sky seasons. And he's basically a disfigured bad guy with like a special suit, and he's leading a new group of gang members. He's basically Deadpool, and they just kind of wedge him into this like the quote unquote Red Sky, the harsher, more adult version of TMNT at this point.
Wow.
Yes.
But even Megavolt pales in comparison to the big baddie at the end of this whole thing, because the Turtles actually end up banishing Shredder and all of the traditional bad guys back into Dimension X. They fuck around and find out for about 6 seasons, and then finally just kick them right through Dimension X. The bad guy ends up becoming a dude named Lord Dreg. Are you guys familiar
I am
Lord
familiar
Dreg
with
at all? Well, Doug, can you tell us a little bit about Mr. Dreg?
I don't know that. I'm just familiar with him.
Yeah. We've heard the name.
That's basically it,
That's basically as far as we've got. Yeah.
But he's basically this giant man bug that comes through Dimension X. But really what he does is usher in this like really obsessive like thing with the Turtles, where like he knows he needs to take them out, but he doesn't do it in the way that Shredder does. Because Shredder and Krang, they're always like, okay, we gotta like collect some crystals, let's open portals, let's start bringing people through, let's see if we can just throw some larger creatures at them. Never works out. Dreg does something different. Dreg goes, you know what? I think we're gonna go with marketing. We're gonna go and try to do some good deeds for the people of New York City. And they fucking buy into it. They buy into Lord Dreg, and they build him a massive fucking building for him to work out of. It's wild, guys.
So he gets the people on his side while the Turtles are, continuously being blasted by the negative aspects of the media.
I mean, it's the perfect crime. Nobody was ever going to think.
This sounds like Fast Five to me. So at one point, do the Turtles come together for one last job to take this guy out?
Well, interesting point, Joe, that you bring up, because Doug, if you have read any of the comics beyond a certain point, there was this convergence arc that happens in the comic book series where we actually have like Raphael and Donatello from the future come back to help the original Turtles. And like Raphael's got an eye patch, and Donatello's just wearing this like really bitchin' like Bane style jacket. It's wild. But it also ushered in this like adult version of the Turtles in a way that we hadn't seen before. And so I remember reading this series as a kid, because there's some really bad shit that happens in like this 3-part series. And and it involves these turtles from the future helping out the past. And so obviously we don't like to do too much spoilers on this show, but a very similar type of storyline happens where these like displaced turtles come back and help out the original ones. And so
it definitely starts out with like old Donnie meeting the young Donnie, and in disbelief they start to brawl, and immediately old Donnie just goes, "Yes, he fights like a young man."
Yeah.
And just goes.
I mean, I wish it was that succinct, but unfortunately it's not. But you know what? I can't think of a better way to start to do what we've been doing with TV, because honestly, with so many hours of television, we can't break down every single piece.
Especially not for 10 seasons.
Jesus, no. Mm-hmm. But we are going to talk about some highs and lows here. And if you guys want, I can go first. Frankly, one of my favorite episodes of this show was called The Night of the Rogues, which is kind of like a callback to like Batman and his Rogues Gallery, because all of like the main baddies are collected to come together to beat the Turtles. So we're talking like Rat King, Slash, Leatherhead, Scumbug, Anthrax, like all the major baddies that we all knew. And they actually beat the shit out of the Turtles. they come together and they're like, oh my God, we actually had a good game plan. We didn't have to do any adjustments at halftime. Holy shit. And yes, eventually the Turtles do make a comeback, but it was the whole, like for me as a kid, I'm like going, my favorite characters got beat, but I'm actually okay with it.
Yeah.
So did you guys, I don't know if you guys saw that episode or not, but it was a very high point for me.
I don't remember it specifically, but it does sound like all of my favorite episodes of the show because, you know, while it was kind of a silly, funny show, all of the villains did always feel like a credible threat, which is a really important thing. A lot of shows don't have that. It's like, hey, here we are. The heroes knock them out easily, and you're never afraid for your heroes. So that makes for really good storytelling, you know?
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, and it wasn't the first time that I would kind of see myself feeling, you know, afraid for the Turtles, because as I pointed out with like the killer pizzas, for example, these guys show up in the video game. They do obviously show up in the show as well. And these killer pizzas actually look like xenomorphs from Alien.
Yeah.
So I had accidentally seen parts of Alien as a kid. This one sent me to my closet with a pillowcase pulled over my head because I was freaked the fuck out by the killer pizzas. They were just that imposing. I mean, Joe, in post, you can put a picture of them up because they are terrifying to look at.
Oh, yeah. I'd also like to point out that this is where Mark's deep-seated fear for pepperoni comes from. You just put it out in a pizza, and he's like, No.
I mean,
no.
There are nuances between pork and beef-based pepperonis, but we will not get into that. That is a topic for another time. But as far as the other side of this spectrum, though, the lows of the series, what do you guys want to call out as maybe a skinned knee or a trip up here for TMNT?
One for me that definitely sticks out is an episode where I don't even remember the full premise, but something happens, whether it's a ray or some sort of weird, like, Freaky Friday, like, chair thing that makes Shredder, under certain conditions, think he's Michelangelo. And there is, like, there's kind of a funny element to it at first when it's like, it's very much Shredder just talking like Michelangelo, which I don't know how Uncle Phil pulled that off so well, of being Shredder and talking like he is some sort of like weird surfer from the 80s in New York.
I think I definitely
that's the premise of the episode. And at one point in time, like the way that Shredder was going to catch Michelangelo and the Turtles, because he's going in and out of thinking he's Michelangelo, was he was going to trap them in a giant pizza, because that's how you trap the Turtles. And he ends up, like, of course, like having the Michelangelo like personality flip on. He's, yo dudes, I'll come and save you, and he cuts them out of the pizza, and it's like, Yeah, I think this is where we start watching a new show. Yep.
It's funny you brought this up because
that's where I think it died for me.
I think I also think it might be a reused trope, because there is also another episode where Splinter and Shredder switch bodies, and like, I think Shredder kind of works his way in pretending to be Splinter, and I don't remember all the exact details of it, but there's definitely another Freaky Friday in there.
Really, I think it's a symptom of a lot of these cartoons that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, though, because there's just only so many ideas you can come up with when you've made that much content. And once you've adapted so much from the comics already, I feel like what ends up happening is really similar to the real Ghostbusters, where most challenges aren't really challenges at all. It's really more of, are we getting in our own way in this episode, or are we actually fighting against the bad guys for once?
Yeah, the only thing I don't know why it didn't happen was the season 5 musical. We were completely denied that that trope as children.
Do most shows typically have a musical in the season 5?
Usually sitcoms. There's a weird musical, or dramas. They get musicals in the 5th season.
I mean, it was a very big thing in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like a Joss Whedon type of thing, so.
Well, I think it would, we'd be doing a disservice to this show if we don't end on a high note, because while we have talked about that, all of us fell off this cartoon probably halfway through its like actual lifetime of being on the air, I think we should remember it for the good times, because I know I look very fondly back on this cartoon and the franchise as a whole. So what could only make this better is if we let Doug, who is our guest, also leave us off with probably what is the best part about this show's legacy and what we should all take away from watching this old cartoon. So Doug, what do you think, man?
It was just everything. It completely changed cartoons like it at the time. You got to think about this. At the time, you had things that were huge properties like Transformers and G.I. Joe and Thundercats, and they're all super popular. One thing that they were lacking was sort of a grounded nature to them. You had these big epic scales, big teams of people, magical powers, all giant crazy stuff. And then you get teenage turtles that like pizza, that make mistakes, that are being trained, by their father, for lack of a better term. That's how they consider it. And you just related to it a lot, and they were literally at the bottom of society. They literally lived in a sewer and were trying to prove to the world that they could be respected, while having a ton of fun at the same time. And, it sounds crazy now that didn't really exist, but it didn't. And a lot of things were inspired by that. A lot of things even parodied the Turtles and kind of tried to, capture that, magic in a bottle that happened with this show. And so, yeah, it's just a super iconic show that pioneered a different way to approach children's cartoons.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And when you look at like the number of attempts to bring this cartoon back as a running cartoon show, like you got it again in the early 2000s, and again in the 2010s, and then right now it's happening again. We have a new iteration of it, and it's a cartoon-based show, and I actually think that might be done, and that's how we got Mutant Mayhem now. So it is just something that shows that no matter what, you just can't keep 4 turtles down, because they'll just keep on coming back.
And with that, we do thank you for listening to Digital Dissection. As always, we appreciate all the Dissection crew does for us week after week. Your support does go an incredibly long way, and if you happen upon this show by accident, which surprisingly some people still do, why not drop us a review or comment on the show?
And we love hearing from all of you. So feel free to message us over at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com, where we welcome your future ideas for any shows, and would like to know if you've ever tried anchovies and peanut butter on your pizza. And let us know anything you'd like to discuss.